The Orchestra stood at the front of the massive training hall and looked at the rows of young aliens sitting before him. His crystalline eyes scanned each face slowly and carefully. This was his favorite part of every training cycle when he got to see the fresh cubs arriving from across the galaxy 17. Different species filled the tiered seats, and each one represented a different world with different customs and different ways of fighting. The Kravik cubs were easy to spot with their massive frames and thick fur that covered their powerful bodies. The Velkrans sat with their chitinous armor gleaming under the harsh lights of the training facility. The small furry Nixtal triplets huddled together near the middle rows, and their big eyes darted around nervous Limethusians, with their flowing tentacles draped across their seats, and the crystalline Jetal, who shimmered with internal light. This was what the Galactic Defense Force was all about, bringing together the young from every corner of known space and teaching them to fight as one. Kesher had been doing this for 30 standard years, and he knew exactly how to mold these cubs into proper soldiers. Pain was the best teacher, he believed, and fear bred respect. Then his eyes reached the back row, and he paused. There, sitting against the curved wall, was something he had not expected to see. A human. The species was new to the galactic community, and most instructors had never even seen one in Persankish. Accessed his neural implant quickly and pulled up the file. The human's name was Sarah Chun, and she was listed as an instructor candidate. Her species had only made contact with the greater galaxy 3 standard years ago. The file noted that humans were persistence predators from a death world called Earth. It mentioned something about endurance and pack bonding, but Kessler dismissed most of it as the usual exaggeration that came with new species trying to prove themselves worthy of joining the GDFHE. Looked at her more closely now. She was small compared to most of the other cubs in the room. Her frame was thin, and she had no visible natural weapons. No claws extended from her fingers, and no fangs protruded from her mouth. Her skin was smooth and unarmored, and looked like it would tear easily. She had dark hair pulled back from her face, and her eyes were a deep brown that seemed to take in everything around her. What struck Kessler as odd was how still she sat. Most cubs fidgeted and whispered to each other, or tried to establish dominance through posturing. The human just sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap and watched. Her stillness was almost predatory in a way that made Kessler's instincts prickle slightly. But he shook off the feeling. She was just a small, soft creature from a backwater world. Nothing to be concerned about. What Kessler failed to notice in that moment was the way the other cubs had positioned themselves around the human. The massive Kravik cub named Torgen sat to her left, and his bulk angled slightly toward her rather than toward the front of the room. The Velkran called Zixili perched on her right, and her sensitive antennae kept swiveling back in the human's direction. The Nixtal triplets Pip-Pap and Pop had chosen seats 2 rows down, but they kept glancing back at her with their large, expressive eyes. Even the Methusian in the corner had oriented one of its eye stalks toward the back row. Sarah Chun had been at Training Complex Sigma 7 for 3 weeks now. In those 3 weeks, something had shifted in the dynamics of the cub cohort. It had started small and innocently enough. On her second day, Sarah had found Torgen struggling in the common area. The young Kravik was staring at a datapad with growing frustration, and his claws kept extending and retracting in agitation. His species learned through physical action and experience, but the GDF curriculum was heavily theory-based. Math and physics and orbital mechanics were not things that came naturally to a species whose ancestors had hunted prey across frozen tundras. Sarah had approached quietly and sat down across from him. Having trouble, she had asked. Torgen had growled low in his throat, but nodded. His pride warred with his desperation. Sarah had looked at the problem on his datapad and then smiled. "Your people hunt right?" she asked. Torgen's ears had perked up at that. "Yes," he rumbled. "We are the greatest hunters on Kravos Prime." "Then let me show you something." Sarah said. Orbital mechanics is just like hunting, but instead of chasing prey across ice, you're chasing it through space. She had spent the next 2 hours teaching him to visualize the problems differently. The trajectory of a spacecraft became the arc of a leap. The gravity well of a planet became the pull of terrain. The conservation of momentum became the principle. Every predator knew that you couldn't change direction mid-pounce without losing speed by. The Entorgan was solving problems that had baffled him for days. He had looked at the small human with new respect. "You teach good," he had said simply. "Pack sister." Sarah hadn't understood the significance of that term. Then a week later, Zixili had been suffering in silence. The Vulcran were desert dwellers who needed high heat and low humidity, but the standard barracks were set to accommodate the average of 17 species, and for Zixili that average was slowly killing her. Her carapace had started to dull and crack, and she moved more slowly each day. Sarah had noticed when others hadn't. She had waited until Zixili was out on a training exercise and then quietly accessed the environmental controls in their shared quarters. Humans were good with technology in a hands-on, intuitive way. She rerouted the climate settings for Zixili's sleeping pod and created a microenvironment that matched the specifications from the Vulcan homeworld. She never mentioned it to anyone. Zixili had returned that evening exhausted and crawled into her pod expecting another miserable night. Instead, she had been enveloped in dry heat and perfect comfort. She had emerged the next morning with her carapace gleaming and her energy restored. "Who did this?" she had demanded. No one answered, but Zixili's compound eyes had tracked to Sarah, who was quietly preparing for the day. The Velcrin had approached her and clicked her mandibles in a gesture of deep respect. "You are clever, friend," Zixili said. "This one owes debt." "No debt," Sarah had replied. "Just help when you can help." Then there were the Nixtal triplets. Pip, Pap, and Pop were the smallest cubs in the cohort, and they stuck together like they were one organism split into 3 bodies. The older cubs from previous training cycles had noticed them and saw easy targets. One evening the triplets had returned to barracks with singed fur and trembling bodies. Older cubs had cornered them and used shock sticks to teach them their place. The triplets had huddled in their sleeping area, whimpering softly. Sarah had found them there. She didn't ask what happened because it was obvious. Instead, she sat down with them and started singing. Her voice was soft but steady, and the melody was strange to their ears. "What is this sound?" Pip had asked. "A lullaby from my world," Sarah said. "We sing it to children who are scared." "We are not children," Pat protested weakly. "We are GDF cubs. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared." Sarah told them. "It means being scared and doing it anyway." She had stayed with them through the whole night cycle. She taught them more Earth songs and told them stories about small creatures on her world that survived through cleverness. She spoke of rabbits that could outrun predators twice their size, and of meerkats that worked together to drive off threats much larger than themselves. By morning, the triplets were sitting up straighter. Sarah had even braided their fur in patterns she said made them look fierce, like the warriors from old Earth tribes when they emerged from barracks. The older cubs had looked at them and seen something different. Nixtal triplets walked with Sarah Chun flanking her on both sides, and suddenly they didn't look so small anymore. One by one, the other cubs had similar experiences. The Methusian, who was struggling with combat training because their species was naturally pacifist. The J-Towel, who couldn't communicate well with species that didn't see in light frequencies. The young Rixcore, whose exoskeleton was molting and left them vulnerable. Sarah helped them all, not because she wanted something in return, not because it was required, but because that was what humans did. They formed bonds, and they protected those bonds. The cubs young enough that their deepest instincts hadn't been buried under training and protocol recognized. Something in Sarah Chun. She was pack, she was family, and now as Dr. Kester began his first formal instruction with this cohort. None of them were thinking about the lessons Ahead, they were thinking about the human in the back row, and they were ready to do whatever it took to protect her. The training complex operated on a strict schedule that began before dawn and ended long after the main star had set. Cubs were expected to attend combat instruction, followed by tactical analysis, then physical conditioning, and finally species integration. Seminars where they learned about each other's cultures and combat styles. Sarah Chun followed the same schedule as all the other Cubs, even though her official designation was Instructor Candidate. The title meant she was supposed to observe and learn teaching methods, but in practice she was treated exactly like every other trainee. She woke when the alarm blared through the barracks. She stood in formation during morning inspection. She ran the obstacle courses and studied the tactical manuals, and tried her best to keep up with species that had natural advantages she could never match. The Kravik were stronger. The Velkran were faster. Jaital could see threats she couldn't perceive, but Sarah had something else. She had patience, and she had the peculiar human ability to see patterns in chaos. More than that, she had empathy in a way that translated across species barriers. When Torgen struggled with the mathematical models required for ship navigation, Sarah didn't just help him solve the problems. She helped him understand why they mattered. "Your people hunt in packs, right?" she had asked him one evening in the study hall. The other Cubs had already left, but Torgen remained staring at his datapad with mounting frustration. "Yes," he growled. "The pack is everything. Then think about space combat the same way." Sarah said, "When your pack hunts, you don't all run in random directions, do you?" Torgen snorted. "Of course not." He said, "We coordinate, and we anticipate where the prey will go." "Exactly." Sarah pulled up a tactical simulation on her own pad. "Look at this." She showed him a formation of 3 ships moving through an asteroid field. "The lead ship is like your pack's alpha," she explained. "It draws the enemy's attention, but the other 2 ships are flanking, just like hunters cutting off escape routes." Torgen's eyes widened as he saw the pattern. "The orbital mechanics," Sarah continued. "That's just knowing how fast you can move through different terrain. In space, the terrain is gravity," she said. "Planets pull ships toward them, and moons create currents in space-time. Like how ice is slippery and snow is slow," Torgen said, catching on. "Exactly like that." Sarah smiled. "You're not bad at math, Torgen. You just needed to see it in a language your instincts understand." The young Kravik looked at the small human with something like wonder. His species valued strength above all else, but they also valued those who made the pack stronger. "You are a good teacher," he said slowly. "You make hard things simple. You are pack sister now," he added, using the term his people reserved for those who weren't blood family but who earned a place in the group. Sarah didn't fully understand what that meant at the time, but she smiled anyway. "Thanks, Torgen," she said. "You're a good student." After that night, Torgen began sitting closer to Sarah during instruction. He would position himself so that his bulk was between her and anyone who might pose a threat. It was subtle and probably unconscious, but the other Cubs noticed. Silly noticed everything. The Velkran had compound eyes that could track multiple targets simultaneously, and antennae sensitive enough to detect emotional pheromones from a dozen species. She had been watching Sarah Chun since the human arrived. What puzzled Zixili was that Sarah didn't follow normal social hierarchy. She didn't try to establish dominance, and she didn't defer to those who were obviously stronger. Instead, she moved through the social structure like water, finding the path of least resistance and somehow making everything flow more smoothly. When Zixili had been struggling with the environmental controls, Sarah had fixed the problem without being asked to the Velkran. Didn't believe in coincidence. Someone had noticed her distress and had taken action to help. The next day, Zixili had approached Sarah during the meal period. "Clever friend," she said, using the Velkran term for someone who showed intelligence and consideration. "This one knows what you did. Sarah looked up from her meal tray. "I don't know what you mean," she said. But her eyes showed she was lying. Humans were terrible liars, Zixili had learned. Their faces gave away everything. The sleeping pod. Zixili clicked her mandibles. The heat and the dry air. "This one was dying slowly, and you fixed it." Sarah shrugged, which was a human gesture. Zixili had learned meant dismissal. "You needed help," Sarah said simply. "I could help, so I did." "No debt?" Zixili asked. Among the Velcren, debts were serious things that bound individuals together for years. "No debt," Sarah confirmed. "Just help me if I need it someday." Zixili's antennae quivered. This was pack behavior. This was how clutchmates treated each other. "You are Clutch sister now," Zixili declared. "This one protects Clutch." From that day forward, Zixili positioned herself on Sarah's other side. If Torgan was a wall of muscle, then Zixili was a razor-sharp sentinel. The Nixtil triplets were harder to win over because they were naturally suspicious. Their homeworld was full of predators that saw the small furry creatures as easy prey. Trust had to be earned through actions, not words. When the older cubs had cornered them and used shock sticks to establish dominance, the triplets had learned a hard lesson. They were at the bottom of the hierarchy, and no one would protect them. They had returned to barracks that night broken in spirit if not in body. The physical pain would fade, but the humiliation would last much longer. Then Sarah had found them. She didn't demand to know what happened, and she didn't promise revenge. Instead, she sat with them and sang. The melody was alien, but the emotion behind it was universal comfort and safety and the promise that the darkness would end. "What is this sound?" Pip had asked. His voice was small and trembling. "A lullaby," Sarah said. "My mother used to sing it to me when I was scared." "We are not younglings," Pap protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Everyone gets scared," Sarah told them. "Being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling it and doing what needs to be done anyway." She told them stories through the long night, tales of Earth creatures that survived through cleverness rather than strength, rabbits that could sense danger and run before predators even knew they were there, that stood guard for their families and raised alarms to keep everyone safe, octopuses that could change color and shape to hide from anything. "Small doesn't mean weak," Sarah said. "It just means you have to be smarter." By morning, the triplets were sitting up straighter. Sarah had braided their fur in patterns she said warriors from Earth used to wear. "Now you look fierce," she told them. When they emerged from barracks, the older cubs were waiting. They expected to see the same cowering triplets from the night before. Instead, they saw Pip, Pap, and Pop walking beside a human. Braids in their fur caught the light and made them look older somehow. More dangerous. But more than that, the human looked at the older cubs with eyes that showed no fear, just cold assessment. The older cubs backed down. They didn't know why, but something in that human's gaze made their instincts scream. From that day, the triplets followed Sarah everywhere. They sat behind her in instruction and flanked her in the corridors. They brought her extra food from the meal hall, and they groomed her hair the way they would groom a pack leader. The pattern repeated with the other cubs. The Methusian named Velshara, who struggled with combat training because violence went against every instinct. Sarah taught them that defense wasn't the same as aggression. She showed them holds and blocks that would stop an attacker without causing permanent harm. "Your people are healers, right?" Sarah said. "Yes." Velshara responded through their translator. "We mend and we grow. Then think of this as healing yourself." Sarah said, "You can't help others if you're dead." Velshara had practiced the defensive techniques with Sarah for hours. By the end, they could stop most attacks and redirect force away from themselves. "You are kind, sister," Velshara said. "This one stands with you." The Jaital named Bright Pulse had different problems. Their species communicated through light frequencies, and most other species couldn't understand them. Bright Pulse had been isolated since arriving at the training complex. Sarah couldn't see their language, but she noticed how the J-Tal dimmed when others ignored them. She started wearing a small device she'd built from spare parts. It translated the J-Tal's light pulses into audible tones. "Can you understand me now?" Bright Pulse had pulsed, the device rendered. "It is musical notes. I can." Sarah said, "Tell me about your world." For the first time since arriving, Bright Pulse had someone to talk to. They pulsed bright with joy. "You are understanding, friend," they said. "This one illuminates your path, one by one." The cubs bonded with Sarah not because she was strong or because she dominated them, but because she saw them as individuals. She helped without expecting payment. She protected without seeking glory. She formed pack bonds the way humans had always done. Small acts of kindness that built into unbreakable loyalty. By the third week, every cub in the cohort had positioned themselves around Sarah Chun. They sat near her, and they watched over her. They brought her food, and they helped her with tasks. Her human body struggled with Torgan, carried her equipment when the weight was too much. Ixaly scouted ahead in the corridors to make sure the path was safe. The triplets kept watch while she studied Volshar, helped her recover after particularly brutal training sessions. Bright Pulse illuminated dark spaces so she could see. Cubs didn't think about what they were doing. It was instinct. Sarah Chun was pack, and pack protected pack. The orchestra had been teaching at training complex Sigma 7 for 30 standard years. He had trained over 4,000 cubs from hundreds of species, had seen them arrive soft and uncertain, and he had watched them transform into warriors worthy of the Galactic Defense Force. His methods were old, and they were harsh, but they worked. At least that was what he told himself. The Galactic Defense Force had implemented new regulations over the past decade. There were committees now and oversight boards. There were rules about appropriate force and psychological safety, but training complex Sigma 7 was remote, and inspections were infrequent out here in the frontier regions. Old methods persisted. Pain taught lessons that words could not. Fear bred respect and caution. A cub who had been struck once would never make the same mistake twice. Kesher believed this with every fiber of his being. The demonstration he had planned for today was one he had performed countless times. It was simple and effective. He would call a cub down from the seating area, and he would show the entire cohort how easily an unprepared body could be disabled. The shock of seeing one of their own drop to the ground would burn the lesson into their minds. Always maintain defensive posture, always be ready, always expect attack. He scanned the rows of cubs, looking for the right candidate, not someone too skilled, because that would make the demonstration difficult, not someone too weak, because that would make it meaningless. Someone in the middle, someone unremarkable. His crystalline eyes settled on the back row. The human sat there watching him with those unsettling brown eyes. She was perfect new to the cohort, and obviously not a physical threat. Her species had no natural weapons, and her frame was small even by human standards. The file said humans were persistence predators, but Kester saw nothing predatory about this one. She looked soft and vulnerable. "You," he clicked, and his translator rendered it into common galactic human. "Come to the front." Sarah Chun stood slowly for just a moment. Kester saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but calculation. She was assessing the situation the way a predator might assess terrain before a hunt. Then the moment passed, and she walked down the steps toward the front of the amphitheater. Her gait was strange to Kester's eyes. Humans walked upright on two legs with a peculiar rolling motion. Their balance was different from most species, centered high in their bodies rather than low to the ground. She reached the demonstration area and stood facing him. "Cubs," Kester announced to the assembled cohort, "observe carefully. What you are about to see is what happens when you fail to maintain proper defensive stance." He could feel the attention of every cub in the room focused on him. Good. This lesson would stick. The human will serve as our example. He continued, "Note how she stands." Sarah stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, and her hands loose at her sides. It was actually a fairly decent neutral stance, but Kester wasn't interested in praising her. No awareness of her surroundings. He lied. No preparation for attack. This is how cubs die in real combat. He moved. Then, faster than most species could track, his arm came around in a practice strike aimed at the nerve cluster in her shoulder. The blow was calibrated precisely, enough force to overwhelm the nerve endings and cause temporary paralysis, not enough to cause permanent damage. He had done this hundreds of times before his strike landed perfectly. Sarah's entire left side went numb, her knees buckled, and she gasped in pain. The sound was very human, a sharp intake of breath that spoke of genuine suffering. She dropped to one knee, and her left arm hung useless at her side. "You see," Kester said, turning to address the cubs. One strike, and he never finished the sentence. The amphitheater exploded into chaos. Dort moved first. The young Kravik had been watching from his seat 3 rows up and to the left when Kester struck Sarah. Something inside Torgen snapped later. He would not be able to explain what he felt in that moment. Rage, yes, but more than that, a primal need to protect Pack Sister. His body moved before his mind caught up. 400 pounds of muscle and fur launched from the Sigaragan, cleared all 5 rows in a single bound that would have been impossible if he had stopped to think about it. His roar shook the walls. Not the practice roar they had been teaching him in combat class, but the full battle cry of an adult Kravik warrior. It came from deep in his chest, and it carried all the fury of his species. The sound alone made several cubs freeze into orcs. Thar turned just in time to see death coming for him. Turgan's claws were extended. The safety caps that regulations required all cubs to wear had somehow come loose. Then razor-sharp talons gleamed under the harsh lights, but Torgen wasn't Alan-Zisili launched herself from the right side. The Velkrin's carapace split open, revealing the bioluminescent threat display that her species used only in lethal combat. She was a blur of chitin and rager. Mandibles spread wide, and the stinger at the end of her tail dripped with venom. The Nixtal triplets moved as one organism. Pip-Pap and Pop dropped from their seats and hit the ground running. Their small bodies moved with terrifying speed. They reached Kester's legs before he could react, and they began to climb. Their teeth were much sharper than they looked. Pip went for the translator device on Kester's chest. Pap targeted the equipment harness that held his emergency beacon. Pop climbed higher, going for the instructor's neck. The Methusian Velshara flowed down from their seat, their tentacles extended and wrapped around Kester's striking arm. The instructor's limb was locked in place, held immobile by a grip that felt like steel cables. Bright pulse. The J-Tal began to pulse at a frequency that made carbon-based neural systems misfire. The DJI's light was blinding and disorienting. Shosh's vision swam and his thoughts scattered. He tried to activate his emergency beacon, but Pop had already torn the device away. He tried to call for help, but Pip had shattered his translator. Torin hit him like a meteor. The impact drove Kester to the ground with enough force to crack the floor plating. The instructor's exoskeleton cracked in 3 places. His left eye shattered and went dark. His right eye dimmed as the impacts continued. Ixili struck from the side. Her stinger punched through a gap in his armor and delivered a dose of venom, not lethal, but enough to paralyze 17 cubs, 17 different species, all moving with a coordination that should have been impossible. They swarmed over Kester like a single organism. Every weak point in his armor was exploited. Every gap was found and struck. The instructor tried to fight back, but there were too many of them. They came from every angle, and they moved with purpose. This wasn't the wild flailing of panicked younglings. This was coordinated assault. A young Rixcore, whose name was Sharp Edge, used their natural blades to cut through Kester's breathing apparatus. A small Quillian called Spike launched their venomous quills with surgical precision. A heavy worlder named Boulder used their mass to pin Kester's legs on, and on it went species that had never worked together before, moving like a pack that had hunted together for years. Sarah Chung remained on her knees. Her left arm still hung useless. Pain radiated from her shoulder in waves, but her eyes were wide with horror as she watched her cubs destroying the Instructor. "Stop." Her voice cut through the chaos. It wasn't loud, but it carried a quality that made every cub freeze. Command authority. The kind of voice that evolution had designed to halt children before they ran into danger. The kind of voice that could override panic and rage and bloodlust. Kind of voice that said, "Pack Mother is speaking, and you will listen." The cubs froze mid-strike. Torgen's claws were raised for a killing blow. Silas Stinger was poised to strike again. The triplets had their teeth buried in Kester's neck, but at Sarah's command, they all stopped. They didn't release their holds. They didn't step back. They simply stopped moving and turned to look at her. Castar lay on the ground beneath them. His exoskeleton was cracked and leaking fluids. Both of his eyes were destroyed. His breathing apparatus was damaged, and he gasped for air. His translator was shattered. His emergency beacon was in pieces. But he was alive, barely. Cubs had pulled their strikes at the last possible moment. They had done terrible damage, but they had stopped short of killing, because Pack Mother had told them to stop. Sarah stood slowly. Her legs shook with pain and shock. Her left arm still hung useless. She looked at Kester and then at the Cubs' medical team. She said quietly. Her voice was steady despite the pain. "For the Instructor. Now." Torgen released his hold and stepped back. Zicily retracted her stinger. The triplets unclenched their jaws. One by one, the Cubs withdrew. They formed a protective circle around Sarah. Their eyes never left Kester. The Instructor so much as twitched. They would strike again, and this time they might not stop. The medical team arrived within minutes. They had been monitoring from the observation deck, and they came prepared for a disaster. What they found was worse than they expected. The orchestra was in critical condition. 17 Cubs stood in a defensive formation around a human, and the human was on her feet, despite obvious injury, looking at the Cubs with eyes full of concern, not for herself, but for them. "Are any of you hurt?" Sarah asked. Her voice was soft but clear. The Cubs shook their heads. They were fine. Pack Mother had been struck. Pack had defended. This was the natural order of things. As the medical team loaded Kester onto a transport stretcher, Sarah finally allowed herself to sit again. Caught her before she hit the ground. "You are safe now, Pack Sister," he rumbled. "We protect you." The security footage was reviewed by 3 separate committees. Each committee consisted of representatives from multiple Galactic Defense Force oversight boards. Each committee watched the same footage from 17 different angles. Each committee reached the same conclusion. What they had witnessed should not have been possible. The timestamp showed the entire incident lasted exactly 43 seconds from auspices. The moment Dr. Kester struck Sarah Chun to the moment she commanded the Cubs to stop. 43 seconds. The first committee focused on the tactical analysis. Admiral Vriegtung was a Kravik himself, and he watched the footage of young Torgen sleep with professional interest. "Impossible," he muttered. "The distance from seat to floor is 27 standard units. The highest recorded jump for a Kravik cub that age is 15 units. He replayed the footage again, cleared all 5 rows in a single bound. The trajectory was perfect. The landing was controlled. The follow-through was devastating. He moved on pure instinct. Vriegton said to the other committee members, "No training could produce that response. This was something deeper." A conless Vulcan strategist named Zixara analyzed Zixili's attack pattern. "Look at the timing," she indicated on the display. "She launches exactly 0.3 seconds after the Kravik, from the opposite angle, creating a pincer movement." But they had no way to coordinate. Another committee member observed. They were sitting in different sections of the amphitheater. Exactly. Zixar said. This wasn't planned. This was instinctive cooperation. The Nixdale representative was most interested in the triplets Pip. Pap and Pop had moved with a unity that even adult Nixdale warriors rarely achieved. They disabled the instructor's communication and defense systems first. The representative noted, not the obvious targets like eyes or breathing, but the tactical targets. Translator so he couldn't call for help. Emergency beacon so he couldn't summon. Reinforcements. These are cubs, the representative said quietly. They should not possess this level of tactical awareness. But it was the overall coordination that truly baffled the committee's 17 species, 17 different evolutionary backgrounds, 17 different combat styles and instincts, all moving as one. The Methusian, who mobilized the striking arm, the Jethel, who provided sensory disruption, the Rixkor, who targeted life support systems, Quillian, who used ranged attacks, the Heavy Worlder, who provided physical control. Every single cub had filled a role in the assault, not because they had trained together, not because they had planned, but because somehow they all knew exactly what needed to be done. It's like watching a pack of earthwolves, one analyst observed, or a pride of savanna lions. Coordinated predation at an instinctive level. But these cubs aren't pack hunters. Another pointed out, half of them come from solitary species. The Velcrin are individualistic. The Jaital have no concept of physical cooperation. The Methusians are pacifists. Yet they all acted as one. The first analyst said, why? The second committee focused on the legal implications assault on an instructor was one of the most serious violations in the GDF code. The cubs could be expelled. They could be barred from ever serving in any galactic military force. Some species might even demand criminal prosecution, but the footage showed something that complicated the legal analysis Dr. Kessler had struck. First, the blow he delivered to Sarah Chun was not a gentle demonstration. The medical report confirmed that her entire left shoulder nerve cluster had been overloaded. She would need 3 days of regenerative therapy to fully recover. Was this appropriate? Instructional force, the lead legal analyst asked. GDF training manual was consulted. Instructors are permitted to use physical demonstration. One member read, however, force used must be proportional and must not cause injury requiring medical intervention. Kessler's strike caused injury. Therefore, he violated protocol first, which makes the cub's response potentially justifiable as defense of a packmate. This was where things got complicated. Galactic law recognized the right to defend. Packmates, nearly every species in the known galaxy, had some version of this principle. If someone attacked a member of your family or your clan or your pod, you had the right to respond with force. But the cubs weren't Sarah's family. They weren't even the same species. How do we define pack? The legal analyst asked. No one had a good answer. The third committee was tasked with interviewing the cubs themselves. This was where the real story emerged. Was interviewed first. He sat in a chair designed for species 3 times his size and radiated barely controlled aggression. Why did you attack Instructor Kessler? The interviewer asked. He struck Pack Sister. Torgan said simply. Is Sarah Chun your biological sister? No. Torgan's confusion was evident. She is not Kravik. Then why do you call her Pack Sister? Torgan struggled to find the words. She helped me when I needed help. He said finally, she taught me when I could not learn. She made me stronger. She is Pack. Pack protects Pack. Interviewer noted this and moved on. Did anyone tell you to attack the instructor? No. Did you plan this attack? No. Then why did you do it? Torgan looked at the interviewer with eyes that showed genuine confusion. He hurt Pack's sister, he said. I protect Pack's sister. This is natural. Zixili was next. She sat with her carapace still showing threat colors. Why did you attack Instructor Kessler? The same question. He struck Clutch's sister. Zixili responded. Sarah Chun is not Velcran. No. Zixili clicked her mandibles. But she is a clever friend. She helped me when I was suffering. She fixed my sleeping pod so I could survive. She is clutch now. Do you regret your actions? Zixili's antennae stiffened. I regret that I did not strike faster. She said coldly. If I had moved quicker, Clutch Sister would not have felt pain. The triplets were interviewed together because they refused to be separated. They sat in a row and answered questions in unison. Why did you attack? He hurt Pack Mother. Pack Mother. Yes. Pip said. She sat with us when we were afraid. She sang to us. Pap added, she made us brave. Pop finished. She is Pack Mother, and we protect Pack. Even though she is not Nixtal. The triplets looked at each other. Pack is not about species, they said. Together, Pack is about who cares for you. One by one, the cubs were interviewed. Shore the pacifist, Methusian, who had struck with violence for the first time in their life. She is kind sister, they said. She taught me that protecting yourself is not the same as hurting others. I will not let kind sister be hurt. Bright Pulse, who pulsed their response in light frequencies. She is an understanding friend. First one to see me. First one to speak with me. I illuminate her path, and I darken the path of her enemies. Sharp Edge, the Rickscore-Spick, the Quillian Boulder. The Heavy Worlder, each cub, told the same story in the language of their own culture. Sarah Chun had helped them. Sarah Chun had protected them. Sarah Chun had made them stronger. Therefore, Sarah Chun was Pack and Pack protected Pack. The committee tried to understand. But she is human, they said. She is not even the same evolutionary tree as most of you. How can she be Pack? The cubs looked at the interviewer with confusion. What did species matter? What did evolutionary background matter? Pack was Pack. Finally, Sarah Chen herself was called to testify. She sat in the interview chamber with her left arm still in a regeneration brace. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed the weight of what had happened. Did you instruct the cubs to attack Instructor Kester? No. Did you know they would attack? No. Sarah said. I was in pain, and I was focused on staying upright. Why do you think they attacked? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. On Earth, she said finally. We have a saying. It takes a village to raise a child. We are social creatures. We form bonds. We protect those bonds. I didn't teach them to attack. She continued. I taught them to care. I showed them kindness when they needed it. I helped them when they struggled. The rest, she paused. The rest was their choice. You formed pack bonds with 17 different species. I formed friendships, Sarah corrected. I saw people who needed help, and I helped them. That's what humans do. We see someone in pain, and we try to ease it. We see someone struggling, and we offer support. It's not strategic. It's just who we are. The interviewer made notes. Do you understand that the cubs could face serious consequences? They attacked an instructor. Sarah's eyes hardened. Derek Esther struck me with enough force to cause nerve damage, she said. That violates GDF training protocols. The cubs responded to defend a packmate. That is recognized as justifiable across virtually every species legal code. If anyone should face consequences, it's the instructor who violated protocol first. You defend them, the interviewer observed. Of course I defend them, Sarah said. They're my cubs. The interviewer paused at that. Your cubs. Sarah realized what she had said, but she didn't take it back. Yes, she said firmly. My cubs. They protected me when I needed protection. Now I protect them. That's what PAC does. The interviews concluded. The committees reviewed all the evidence, the security footage, the medical reports, the testimony from every witness, the legal precedents. In the end, they reached a decision that surprised no one who truly understood what had happened at Training Complex. Sigma 7 Dr. Kester was stripped of all teaching credentials. He was banned from ever working with cubs again. His methods were deemed excessive, and his violation of protocol was clear. 17 cubs were cleared of all charges. They had acted in defense of a packmate. The fact that the packmate was a different species was irrelevant. The new training facility was different from anything the Galactic Defense Force had ever built. Sarah Chen had designed it herself with input from educators. Across a dozen species gone were the tiered amphitheaters that placed instructors above. Students gone were the harsh lights and cold metal walls. Main instruction hall was circular with curved seating that brought everyone into the same space. The lighting was adjustable to accommodate species with different visual ranges. The temperature and humidity could be controlled in zones. There were quiet spaces for species that needed solitude, social spaces for species that thrived in groups, exercise areas designed for different gravity preferences. Everything about the facility was built around a single principle. Every cub mattered. Every individual had value. Strength came not from dominance, but from cooperation. Sarah stood in the center of the circular hall and waited for her first official class to arrive. 6 months had passed since the incident at Training Complex Sigma 7. 6 months of hearings and policy reviews. 6 months of Sarah working with GDF leadership to redesign the entire training curriculum. 6 months of the galaxy watching to see if this human instructor could really change centuries of tradition. The cubs began filing in 20 new trainees from 18 different species. They looked nervous, as all new cubs did. They found seats scattered around the circle. Some sat together with others of their own kind. Some sat alone. Sarah noticed all of this. She noticed the Grenix cub, who sat as far from everyone else as possible. The species was known for being aggressive and territorial. She noticed the pair of Silith, who huddled together. Their species was prey animals on their homeworld, and they startled at every sound. She noticed the young Drax, who sat with perfect military posture there. Species had a long warrior tradition, and this cub clearly felt the weight of expectations. And then she noticed something else. Scattered among the new cubs were 17 familiar faced. Organ sat near the back. His massive frame took up 2 seats, but his eyes were locked on Sarah's eye perched on one of the higher levels. Her antennae swiveled constantly, tracking every new cub and assessing for threats. The Nixdale triplets sat together in the middle there. Fur was braided in the patterns. Sarah had taught them Volshara, the Methusian Bright Pulse, the J-Tal Sharp Edge, and Spike and Boulder, all 17 cubs who had defended her. All 17 who should have been assigned to advanced training by now. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Torgan stood slowly. "Where Pack Mother goes," he said. "Pack follows. You should be in advanced combat training," Sarah protested. "You earned your places." Zixili clicked her mandibles. "We requested reassignment," she said. "All of us? We stay with Clutch Sister." The new cubs watched this exchange with wide eyes. They didn't understand what they were witnessing, but they would learn. Sarah took a breath and steadied herself. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." She looked around the circle at all of the cubs, new and old, familiar and unknown. "Welcome to Advanced Integration Training," she began. "My name is Instructor Sarah Chun. I'm human, which means I come from a species you've probably never heard of. We're new to the galactic community. We don't have natural armor or claws or venom. We're not the strongest or the fastest, but we have something else." She paused. "We have each other. And that is what you're going to learn here. Not how to fight alone, not how to dominate others, but how to be stronger together than you ever could be apart." One of the new cubs raised a tentacle. It was a young Qualath who looked skeptical. "Instructor," the translator rendered their clicks. "I am here to become a warrior, not to make friends." Sarah nodded. "I understand. Your species has a proud tradition of individual combat. Qualath warriors are legendary." The young cubs straightened at this. Pride was evident in their posture. "But tell me," Sarah continued, "have you ever seen a Qualath phalanx?" The cub hesitated. "Yes," they said. Once during a ceremony, 20 warriors moving as one. How did it make you feel? It was. The cub searched for words. Beautiful, terrifying, powerful. Exactly, Sarah said. Now imagine a phalanx made of 20 different species, each one bringing their unique strengths, each one covering the weaknesses of the others, she gestured. Around the circle, the Grenics over there. The aggressive territorial cub looked up in surprise. Your species can sense electrical fields. You can detect ambush before they happen. She pointed to the Silith pair. Your species has the fastest reflexes. In known space, you can react to threats before anyone else sees them coming. She indicated the young Drax. Your species never gives up. Once you commit to a course of action, you see it through no matter what. Sarah walked around the circle slowly, separately. You are each skilled in your own way. Together you could be unstoppable, but only if you learn to trust each other. Only if you learn that your packmate's strength is your strength, that their survival is your survival. Torgan spoke up from the back. Pack Mother teaches truth, he rumbled. I am stronger because of my pack. I am faster because Zixili scouts ahead. I am smarter because Sarah teaches me. I am braver because the triplets watch my back. Zixili added her voice. Clutch sister is right. Alone I am one warrior. With Clutch I am 17 warriors. The new cubs listened. Some looked interested, some looked doubtful. The Grenix cub spoke up. This sounds like weakness, they said, relying on others. My species teaches that dependence is death. Sarah walked over to where the Grenix sat. She didn't invade their space, but she got close enough to meet their eyes. Your species also teaches that a Grenix who charges into a nest of Skrull alone is a fool, she said. Not because you can't kill Skrull, but because there are too many of them. The Grenix's eyes widened. How did this human know about Skrull when Grenix hunt Skrull? Sarah continued. They work in groups. One draws attention. Others strike from the sides. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. The Grenix cub sat back slowly. You have studied my world. They said, I have studied all of your worlds, Sarah said, because I need to understand you to teach you. And what I've learned is that every species in this room has some tradition of working together. Even the most solitary hunters cooperate when the prey is too dangerous to face alone. She returned to the center of the circle. Here is what we're going to do, she said. For the next 6 months, you're going to train together. You're going to learn each other's strengths and weaknesses. You're going to practice communication and coordination. And you're going to discover that the being sitting next to you, the one who looks nothing like you, the one who comes from a world you've never seen, that being can be the difference between life and death, between success and failure, between being alone and being part of something greater. The new cubs looked at each other uncertainly. They had come here expecting traditional training pain and fear and dominance hierarchies. Instead, they got a human talking about cooperation. One of the Silith spoke in a quiet voice. Instructor. What if we fail? What if we cannot work together? Sarah smiled. Gently. Then I will help you figure out why, she said, and we'll try again. I'm not here to break you down. I'm here to build you up. All of you. She clapped her hands together. The sound was very human, and it made several cubs jump. Okay, she said. First, exercise. I want you to pair up. Find someone from a different species. Someone you don't know. Someone who makes you uncomfortable. The cubs hesitated. The old instincts were strong. Stay with your own kind. Trust outsiders. But then Torgan stood. He walked over to the young Drax, who sat with military precision. You are warrior species. Torgan said, I am warrior species. We train together. The Drax looked up at the massive Kravik. Torgan was 3 times their size, but the Drax stood and nodded. Agreed. Zixili approached the Qualith, who had questioned the training. You move fast, she said. I move fast. We see who is faster. The quo's competitive nature sparked. Challenge accepted. One by one, the cubs began to pair up. The Nixtal triplets adopted the nervous Silith pair. We were small and scared once. Pip said, Pack Mother helped us be brave. Now we help you. Volshara approached the aggressive. Grenix, you do not like to be touched, the Methusian observed. This one understands. We work together. Without touching, we find other ways. The Grenix looked suspicious, but intrigued. Other ways. Yes, Valshara said. This one is creative. Within minutes, the hall was filled with unlikely pairs, species, that would never interact in nature working together learning about each other, starting to trust. Sarah watched it all with satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Over the next weeks and months, the cubs would train together. They would face challenges designed to force cooperation simulations where success required every member to contribute. Exercises where individual strength meant nothing without team coordination. They would learn each other's languages and customs. They would share meals and stories. They would see each other not as alien but as packmates. Some would resist at first. The old ways were deeply ingrained. But Sarah had 17 examples of what was possible. 17 cubs who had already learned the lesson, who had bonded across species barriers, who had become something greater than the sum of their parts, and those 17 would teach the new cubs not through lectures, but through example, by showing what pack really meant. 6 months later, the Galactic Defense Force High Command came to observe the training.